The volcanic rock felt cool beneath his fingers as Lieutenant Tadamichi Kuribayashi traced the contours of his underground fortress. February 19th, 1945, dawn -6 hours, Iwo Jima. Through 3 meters of solid stone, he could barely hear the pre-invasion bombardment thundering above. 74 days of naval shells that had done nothing but rearrange the surface ash. His defenses, 11 miles of interconnected tunnels cut into Mount Suribachi's heart, remained untouched. The Americans would come with their usual tactics: bombardment, then infantry, then tanks firing high explosive shells that bounced harmlessly off reinforced concrete. His commanders in Tokyo had sent intelligence reports about new American weapons, something about tanks that breathed fire. Kuribayashi had laughed at the radio transcript. What could fire do to stone? By sunset on that same day, he would discover the answer written in the screams of burning men. The transformation of naval warfare in the Pacific hinged on a problem no one had solved. How do you kill an enemy who won't come out? Japanese defensive doctrine, perfected across 3 years of island warfare, had evolved into something approaching genius. On Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu, American forces learned a brutal lesson. Naval bombardment, no matter how massive, couldn't reach men buried in volcanic rock. The Japanese had adapted by building deeper, connecting their positions through lateral galleries, creating mutually supporting fields of fire that turned every cave mouth into a killing zone. By 1944, American casualty rates for assaulting fortified positions had become unsustainable. Infantry with portable M2 flamethrowers suffered catastrophic losses. One battalion on Iwo would eventually reach a 92% casualty rate among flamethrower operators. Men carrying 70 pounds of napalm-filled tanks on their backs became immediate targets, walking bombs that enemy riflemen prioritized above all else. The solution emerged not from Pentagon planners, but from construction crews in Hawaii. At Schofield Barracks in late 1944, Seabees, the U.S. Naval Construction Battalions, began a conversion program that would rewrite the mathematics of island warfare. They took standard M4A3 Sherman tanks and performed field surgery, removed the 75mm main gun, strip out ammunition racks, install a Navy Mark I flamethrower in the turret, and pack the hull with 300 gallons of napalm-thickened gasoline. The first prototype, christened Hells Afire during the Marianas Campaign, looked like a war crime welded to tracks. Engineers simplified the firing mechanism from over 100 moving parts to roughly half a dozen. Field reliability trumped elegance. The flamethrower could project burning fuel 400 feet under high pressure, more than double the range of portable units. Colonel Unmacht's secret flame tank group, working behind security fences at Schofield, produced 354 mechanized flamethrower tanks by VJ Day. Each conversion required 40-hour training courses for Marine and Army crews because these weren't factory-issued weapons. They were improvised answers to an immediate problem, built by men who understood that complexity killed in combat. The Seabees standardized multiple variants: CBH-1, CBH-2, POA, CWS configurations, though Marines on the front lines often ignored official designations and simply called them Ronsons, Seabees, or Mark Is. The terminology chaos reflected the weapon's hybrid nature, born from necessity rather than procurement committees. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. If you're finding this history compelling, hit that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started with this story, and what comes next changed everything. The physical reality inside these converted Shermans bordered on unbearable. Thick heat radiated through turret metal during operation, the interior reeking of hot petrol and burned rubber, a constant oily metallic tang from napalm vapors that soaked into clothing and skin. Crews described their vehicles as both furnace and sanctuary. The armor protected them from the suicidal exposure of portable flamethrower operators, but the price was working inside what felt like a mobile oven. The CB-type conversions limited turret traverse to about 180 degrees in early models, forcing crews to maneuver the entire hull to sweep fire across some sectors. Typical fuel loads ranged from 290 to 300 gallons of thickened fuel, enough for repeated short bursts or a few sustained streams that could fill entire cave systems with fire. Early trials on Saipan and Tinian between June and August 1944 taught American commanders something profound. Mechanized flamethrowers didn't just clear bunkers more effectively than portable units. They saved infantry lives by eliminating the need for close assault. A tactic emerged that Marines would call corkscrew and blowtorch. Standard Shermans or demolition charges would crack open a bunker's reinforced entrance, shattering concrete and blast doors. Then the flame tank would roll forward and pump napalm into the cavity, converting defensive positions into cremation chambers. The combination of weapons, explosive force followed by sustained fire, proved unstoppable against fortifications designed to resist naval bombardment. But these early successes happened on relatively small islands, against defenses the Japanese considered improvised. The real test would come at Iwo Jima, where 21,000 defenders occupied the most sophisticated defensive network ever constructed by imperial forces. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi had spent 8 months preparing his fortress, learning from every previous defeat, engineering positions specifically to resist every weapon the Americans had demonstrated. His bunkers featured fuel-proof mesh over ventilation shafts, blast doors in lateral galleries, interconnected tunnel systems that allowed defenders to reposition under cover. His artillery zeroed every possible landing beach. His riflemen trained to fire from spider holes that appeared and disappeared like magic tricks. His orders forbade banzai charges. Every man would fight from cover, making the Americans pay in blood for every yard. Fire couldn't penetrate stone. That's what Kuribayashi's subordinates told themselves as they watched the invasion fleet gather on the horizon, February 18, 1945. The coming battle would prove them catastrophically wrong. What they didn't know was that 8 specially modified M4A3 Shermans carrying Navy Mark I flamethrowers were about to land with the first assault waves. The Japanese defenders had prepared for everything except the weapon that would transform their fortress into their tomb. The ramp dropped at 0900 hours on Green Beach, Iwo Jima, and Corporal James Vedder's first breath of the island tasted like sulfur and diesel exhaust. February 19, 1945. The black volcanic sand crunched underfoot with a sound like breaking glass, each grain a fragment of cooled lava, sharp enough to shred boot leather. Smoke from naval bombardment hung low, mixing with steam vents from the island's volcanic core, creating a fog that smelled of rotten eggs and burned metal. Behind him, one of the 8 flame tanks growled up the beach, its tracks churning through sand that swallowed traction like quicksand. The crew had painted Satan across the bow in crude white letters. Vedder thought it was melodramatic until he saw what the machine could do. The first 24 hours would teach the Marines why conventional tactics had stopped working. The landing force hit Green Beach expecting resistance. What they got was silence. Kuribayashi had forbidden his men from firing during the landing, allowing 15,000 Marines to come ashore before unleashing hell. At 1000 hours, the island erupted. Artillery fire from pre-registered coordinates turned the beachhead into a slaughterhouse. Mortars walked across the sand in perfect patterns. Machine gun fire from invisible positions cut down entire squads. The Marines went to ground, crawling toward their objectives, and discovered the first bunkers, reinforced concrete structures with walls 3 feet thick, firing slits barely 6 inches wide, positioned to create interlocking fields of fire. High-explosive shells from supporting Shermans sparked off the concrete like fireworks. Infantry with pole charges tried to approach, but got cut down in the open. By nightfall of the first day, casualties exceeded 2,000. The mathematics were simple and terrible. At this rate, the island would cost 30,000 American dead before the flag reached Mount Suribachi's summit. That's when the flame tanks entered the equation. The first documented use came on D+1, February 20th, against a bunker complex designated Strong Point 14. 3 standard Shermans had spent 40 minutes firing at the position without effect. The Japanese inside waited patiently, firing when Marines attempted to advance, then retreating into lateral galleries when the tanks fired back. Captain Robert Dunlap, commanding Company G, 2nd Battalion, 27th Marines, radioed for anything that could crack the stalemate. A Seabee-converted Sherman rumbled up the ridgeline, its commander, Sergeant Michael Russo, scanning the bunker through his periscope. What happened next was recorded in after-action reports with clinical precision that barely masked the horror. Russo maneuvered his tank to within 60 feet of the bunker entrance. A satchel charge from the infantry blew the outer blast door off its hinges. Then the flame tank's turret rotated, slowly, mechanically, with the deliberate patience of an executioner adjusting his aim. The flamethrower fired. A tongue of orange fire 30 feet long punched into the bunker opening, splashing liquid flame across the interior walls. The napalm, thickened gasoline mixed with aluminum soaps and petroleum jelly, stuck to everything it touched: stone, steel, flesh. It burned at temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius. The bunker's ventilation system, designed to filter gas and smoke, became a chimney that sucked flame deeper into the complex. Secondary bursts followed, each one lasting 3 to 5 seconds, pumping hundreds of gallons of burning fuel into the galleries. The screaming started immediately. Japanese soldiers stumbled from auxiliary exits 50 yards from the main bunker, their uniforms ablaze, black smoke pouring from their mouths. Some collapsed after a few steps. Others ran until rifle fire from Marine positions ended their agony. The bunker itself began coughing flame from firing slits and ventilation shafts. The entire structure transformed into a furnace. Thick black smoke billowed from every opening, carrying the smell of burning kerosene and seared flesh. When engineers inspected the position 2 days later, they found 23 bodies, some burned beyond recognition, others killed by smoke inhalation or carbon monoxide poisoning. The stone walls were scorched black. The heat had been intense enough to crack concrete. Word spread through the Marine divisions faster than official radio traffic. By D+3, frontline units were explicitly requesting flame tank support before assaulting hardened positions. Tactical doctrine shifted overnight. Instead of wasting hours on artillery preparation and infantry assaults, companies waited for a flame tank to become available. The demand exceeded supply. Only a handful of the converted Shermans had made it ashore intact. Marine commanders began rationing their use, creating a priority system where flame tanks were dispatched to the most critical sectors. A single vehicle might be called to 3 different assault zones over a 24-hour period, its crew working until the fuel tanks ran dry, then racing to resupply points where Seabee maintenance teams waited with pumper trucks full of napalm. The psychological effect radiated outward from every engagement. Marines who had spent days pinned down by bunker fire suddenly watched positions that had seemed impregnable become death traps in minutes. The atmosphere on the front lines changed when a flame tank rolled up. Attackers felt relief and momentum, a sense that the stalemate had broken. One sergeant later wrote, "You could feel the difference. Men who'd been hugging dirt for hours would stand up, ready to advance, the moment they heard that Sherman's engine." The Japanese response was panic bordering on hysteria. Intercepted radio transmissions and prisoner interrogations revealed defenders calling the flame tanks fire-breathing monsters and demons from hell. Some units abandoned forward positions rather than face the weapons. Japanese commanders ordered their men to target flame tanks with concentrated fire, throwing magnetic mines, satchel charges, and anti-tank rifle rounds at the vehicles. The crews learned quickly that their armor wasn't invulnerable. Several flame tanks were knocked out by close-range attacks. But the mathematical exchange favored the Americans. Every flame tank lost had already cleared multiple bunker complexes that would have cost dozens of infantry casualties using conventional methods. The tactic evolved into something Marines called corkscrew and blowtorch. Demolition teams or standard tank fire would crack open a bunker's entrance, shattering the blast doors and concrete facing. Then the flame tank would maneuver into position and deliver sustained bursts directly into the breach. The napalm didn't just burn. It consumed oxygen, creating a vacuum that sucked air from lateral galleries and interconnected tunnels. Defenders deep inside the complexes, thinking themselves safe from the flames, died from asphyxiation or carbon monoxide poisoning. The thick black smoke from burning napalm filled tunnel systems, forcing men toward exits where Marine rifle fire waited. Entire defensive networks, designed to be mutually supporting and interconnected, became traps when flame could spread through the connecting passages. But the weapon's effectiveness came with costs beyond casualty counts. Inside the flame tanks, crews endured conditions that bordered on unbearable. The turret became a furnace during sustained operations, metal surfaces hot enough to raise blisters on bare skin. The smell, hot petrol, burned rubber, metallic napalm vapors, soaked into clothing and skin, a stench that water couldn't wash away. Seals and hoses risked rupture under the heat and pressure, and a catastrophic leak meant 300 gallons of napalm turning the crew compartment into a crematorium. Refueling exposed crews to enemy fire while transferring highly flammable loads under combat conditions. The psychological burden was unique. Flame tank operators understood they were inflicting deaths more terrible than bullets. Some crews requested transfers. Others became coldly efficient, viewing their role through the lens of mathematical necessity. Better Japanese soldiers die in flames than American Marines die in frontal assaults. By the end of the first week on Iwo Jima, Marine commanders filed reports that would later reshape American military doctrine. The most frequently quoted assessment came from multiple post-battle accounts. Flame tanks were the most valuable weapon systems on Iwo Jima. This wasn't hyperbole. The statistics supported it. Positions that had resisted days of bombardment fell in minutes when flame tanks arrived. Infantry casualties dropped dramatically in sectors where mechanized flamethrowers were available. The pace of advance increased. Yet even as flame tanks proved decisive, Japanese defenders continued modifying their tactics in real time. What happened next would test whether adaptation could defeat innovation, whether human determination could overcome technological supremacy, whether stone and will could stand against liquid fire. Sergeant Yasuo Kobayashi pressed his back against the tunnel wall and counted his breaths. March 2nd, 1945, 12 days into the battle, somewhere beneath Hill 362 Alpha. The volcanic rock felt damp against his shoulders. Condensation from 12 men breathing in a space designed for 4. Above them, the muffled thud of tank treads vibrated through stone. His commander, Lieutenant Ono, had ordered them to hold this position indefinitely, to wait until American infantry came close enough to engage. The standing order was clear: ignore the tanks, kill the infantry, retreat through lateral galleries before the Americans could respond. It had worked for 11 days. Then they heard the sound that changed everything. A mechanical wheezing followed by a whooshing roar that echoed through the tunnels like a dragon's breath. The fire came before the screaming. Flames punched through the bunker entrance 60 feet away, a pressurized stream of burning liquid that splashed across the tunnel floor and crept toward them like a living thing. The napalm stuck to the walls, burning with a yellow-orange intensity that turned the tunnel into a furnace. Black smoke filled the gallery within seconds, thick and oily, carrying the chemical stench of petroleum and something worse, burning flesh from the men nearest the entrance. Kobayashi's lungs began to burn. His eyes watered. The heat became unbearable even at this distance. Someone panicked and ran deeper into the tunnel network. Others followed. Kobayashi made it to an auxiliary exit 200 feet from the main bunker and emerged gasping into daylight, where Marine rifle fire cut him down. He survived as one of the 216 Japanese soldiers captured alive out of 21,000 defenders. The flame tanks weren't just clearing positions, they were erasing them. By early March, the American advance had developed a rhythm that Japanese commanders found impossible to counter. Standard reconnaissance would identify fortified positions. Artillery and naval gunfire would suppress visible defenses. Then the flame tanks would roll forward, their crews moving with the practiced efficiency of factory workers on an assembly line. The typical engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. Demolition charges or tank fire would breach the entrance. The flamethrower would pump sustained bursts into the opening. 300 gallons of napalm delivered in carefully controlled streams. The smoke and flames would force defenders into lateral tunnels where follow-up bursts or grenades finished the work. Then the tank would move to the next position, while combat engineers sealed the bunker with explosives, ensuring no one could reoccupy it. The speed of this process shocked Japanese officers who had designed defenses to resist siege warfare. Positions that should have held for days fell in hours. Cave complexes that should have required weeks of reduction were cleared in a single afternoon. The flame tanks operated on a priority system. Marine units radioed requests to division headquarters, which dispatched vehicles to the sectors facing the strongest resistance. A single flame tank might service 3 or 4 different assault zones in a 24-hour period, its crew working until fuel exhaustion forced them to resupply. Seabee maintenance teams established forward refueling points where crews could take on fresh loads of napalm, perform basic maintenance, and return to action within 30 minutes. The logistics behind this operation, producing, transporting, and distributing hundreds of thousands of gallons of thickened fuel under combat conditions, represented organizational capacity that Japan couldn't match. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. The Chemical Warfare Service produced over 250,000 gallons of napalm for the Okinawa campaign alone. The 713th Tank Battalion converted dozens of Shermans to flame configuration under Seabee supervision in preparation for that operation. By late June 1945, the Army's 10th Corps deployed nearly 170 Shermans equipped with flamethrowers. The production pipeline had accelerated from experimental conversions in late '44 to mass production by mid-'45. 72 additional flame tanks were requested and completed for the planned invasion of Japan by VJ Day. This was American industrial capacity at full extension, identifying a tactical problem, engineering a solution, and scaling production to meet demand within months, not years. But statistics don't capture what it felt like on the ground. Marines advancing behind flame tanks described an atmospheric shift that transcended tactical advantage. When a flame tank rolled up to a ridge or bunker line, relief flooded through assault units that had been pinned down for hours. Men who had been hugging volcanic ash, returning fire at invisible enemies, suddenly stood and prepared to advance. The weapon's presence created momentum, a psychological advantage that complemented its physical destructive power. Infantry officers learned to time their advances to follow flame tank operations, using the confusion and panic sown by the weapon to seize ground before defenders could regroup. The Japanese response evolved from mockery to terror to desperate adaptation. Early in the campaign, some commanders had dismissed flame tanks as psychological weapons of limited tactical value. Stone couldn't burn, they reasoned, and their deep positions would protect them from surface fires. This confidence evaporated after the first week. Intercepted communications revealed growing panic. Reports described bunkers breathing fire, entire tunnel networks rendered impassable by smoke and heat. Defenders suffocating in positions they had believed impregnable. Some units attempted to counter the threat by concentrating anti-tank fire on flame tanks, prioritizing them above all other targets. Japanese soldiers armed with magnetic mines and satchel charges received orders to suicide attack the flame vehicles. Several tanks were destroyed this way, but the exchange ratio still favored the Americans. Each lost flame tank had already eliminated multiple fortified positions that would have cost dozens of infantry casualties. Other defenders tried sealing themselves inside their positions. This proved catastrophic. Bunkers with blocked ventilation systems became gas chambers when flame penetrated the structure. The napalm consumed oxygen while generating thick smoke and carbon monoxide. Men deep inside lateral galleries, believing themselves safe from the flames, died from asphyxiation or poisoning. Engineers clearing these positions days later found bodies untouched by fire, victims of the invisible killer that accompanied the visible weapon. The interconnected tunnel systems that were supposed to provide escape routes instead became distribution networks for smoke and toxic gases. A single successful flame attack on a bunker entrance could render an entire subterranean complex uninhabitable. The sensory experience of these operations seared itself into veteran memories. The smell at the front when a flamethrower engaged, seared flesh and kerosene-like napalm odors mixed with salt spray, diesel exhaust, and the sulfur stink of volcanic vents. The visual signature: black plumes of smoke rising from bunkers, orange tongues of flame licking from firing slits. The sudden silence after a sustained burst when defenders either fled or died. The sound, the mechanical whoosh of the flamethrower firing, the roar of igniting napalm, sometimes the screaming. Field photographers captured these moments, flame bursts lighting the gray volcanic landscape, Sherman silhouettes wreathed in their own fire, the aftermath where smoking bunker entrances gaped like mouths frozen mid-scream. Inside the flame tanks, crews developed their own rituals for enduring the psychological burden. Some talked constantly during operations, maintaining running commentary to distract from what they were doing. Others went silent, focusing on technical execution, fuel pressure, nozzle angle, burst duration. All of them understood the mathematics. Their weapon killed in ways more terrible than bullets, but it saved American lives by eliminating the need for infantry to assault hardened positions. This calculus didn't make the work easier, but it made it bearable. Veteran crews described a kind of emotional numbness that set in after the first few operations, a protective detachment that allowed them to function despite the horror they inflicted. The weapon's effectiveness forced American commanders to confront uncomfortable questions. Was the terror these weapons produced strategic advantage or moral liability? Did the end, reduced American casualties, justify the means, burning enemy soldiers alive? The U.S. Army's post-battle analysis declared flame tanks a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, acknowledging that their presence alone forced Japanese commanders to abandon positions. This candid assessment appeared in official reports that circulated through military channels, sparking debates that would continue long after the war ended. By mid-March 1945, Iwo Jima's outcome was no longer in doubt. The question was how much longer the killing would continue, and what lessons American planners would draw from the flame tank's devastating success as they prepared for the next island and the invasion of Japan itself. The flag reached the summit of Mount Suribachi on February 23, 1945, but the dying continued for another month. March 15th, underground command post, northern sector of Iwo Jima. The air tasted of cordite and volcanic dust, thick enough to coat the tongue. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi sat at a makeshift desk, writing his final dispatch to Imperial headquarters by candlelight. Around him, the last 200 defenders prepared for a final breakout assault they knew would fail. The stone fortress he had built, 11 miles of tunnels, 1,500 fortified positions, a defensive network designed to bleed the Americans for months, had lasted 36 days. The flame tanks had changed the equation. The battle for Iwo Jima officially ended on March 26th, though scattered resistance continued into April. Of 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 were captured alive. The rest died in their positions or during desperate final attacks. American casualties exceeded 26,000, including nearly 7,000 dead. The only Pacific battle where American casualties approached Japanese losses. Yet military analysts studying the engagement reached a disturbing conclusion. Without the flame tanks, casualties would have been catastrophically higher. Every fortified position the flame weapons reduced in hours might have required days of infantry assaults. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Post-battle assessments credited the mechanized flamethrowers with saving thousands of American lives by eliminating the need for frontal assaults on hardened targets. This conclusion shaped planning for the next island. Okinawa, April 1st through June 21st, 1945, would become the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War. American planners, studying the lessons from Iwo Jima, requested massive increases in flame tank support. The 713th Tank Battalion underwent emergency conversions, transforming dozens of standard Shermans into flame vehicles under Seabees supervision. By the campaign's start, over 170 mechanized flamethrowers were deployed with assault forces. The scale of napalm production expanded to support this commitment. The Chemical Warfare Service delivered over 250,000 gallons of thickened fuel, establishing forward production facilities and distribution networks across the invasion beaches. Okinawa proved everything Iwo Jima had taught, but worse. The Japanese defenders, learning from previous defeats, had constructed even more elaborate defensive networks. The Shuri Line, a series of interconnected ridges and escarpments, honeycombed with caves and bunkers, stretched across the island's southern third. Rain turned the volcanic soil into clinging mud that bogged down vehicles and slowed infantry to a crawl. Yet the flame tanks, now deployed in larger numbers and integrated into standard tactical doctrine, maintained their devastating effectiveness. Commanders no longer requested flame tank support as a special asset. They incorporated mechanized flamethrowers into routine assault planning. The weapons had evolved from experimental solution to standard combined arms component. The tactical applications expanded beyond simple bunker clearing. Flame tanks were used to flame forward and reverse slopes, eliminating defenders on both sides of ridgelines in coordinated attacks. They cleared spider holes, individual fighting positions disguised in terrain. They rendered cave mouths impassable by filling them with sustained napalm bursts that left the entrances choked with smoke and debris. They followed demolition teams to finish stubborn strongpoints that resisted conventional explosives. The versatility of the weapon system, combined with the crew's growing expertise, made them indispensable to ground commanders facing the most sophisticated defenses Japan could engineer. But Okinawa also revealed the weapon's limitations. Flame tanks remained vulnerable to close-range anti-tank attacks. Japanese soldiers armed with satchel charges and magnetic mines achieved some success against the vehicles, particularly in close terrain where maneuver was restricted. The crews still endured terrible conditions: heat, fumes, and the psychological burden of their work. Maintenance requirements increased as sustained operations wore down seals, hoses, and firing mechanisms. Refueling remained dangerous, exposing crews to enemy fire while handling thousands of gallons of volatile fuel. The weapons were effective, but not invincible, powerful, but not without cost. By June 1945, American planners turned their attention to the ultimate objective. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, would dwarf every previous Pacific operation. Initial estimates projected hundreds of thousands of American casualties assaulting the home islands. Staff officers studying flame tank performance at Iwo Jima and Okinawa requested 72 additional mechanized flamethrowers specifically for the Japanese mainland assault. Colonel Unmacht's group at Schofield Barracks worked to complete these conversions by summer's end. The scale of napalm production increased to meet anticipated demand. Tactical doctrine incorporated lessons learned across 2 years of island warfare. Everything pointed toward an invasion where flame tanks would play a central, perhaps decisive role in reducing Japanese fortifications. The atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August made that invasion unnecessary. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, and the flame tanks that had been prepared for Operation Downfall never fired their weapons in combat. Yet their legacy extended far beyond the battles they fought. Post-war military analysis concluded that mechanized flamethrowers represented one of the most significant tactical innovations of the Pacific War. Army doctrine incorporated flame weapons as standard equipment for assaulting fortified positions. The lessons learned about combined arms coordination, about the psychological impact of overwhelming firepower, about the value of field improvisation over bureaucratic procurement, shaped American military thinking for decades. The human legacy proved more complex. Veterans who served in flame tank crews carried unique psychological burdens. Unlike infantrymen who killed at distance or artillerymen who never saw their targets, flame tank operators witnessed the immediate, terrible effects of their weapons. Some sought transfers. Others found ways to compartmentalize, viewing their role through the lens of military necessity. Most lived with memories they rarely discussed. The screaming, the smell, the knowledge that their weapon killed in ways more terrible than bullets. Post-war psychiatric studies noted elevated rates of what would later be called PTSD among flame weapon operators, though the military of that era lacked effective treatment frameworks. The moral questions raised by these weapons never found easy answers. Were flame tanks justified by the American lives they saved? Did the horror they inflicted violate principles of proportional warfare? Could weapons that killed through burning and suffocation be reconciled with notions of civilized combat? The U.S. military's assessment acknowledged these tensions while maintaining that the weapon's effectiveness justified their use. The Army declared flame tanks a psychological weapon as much as a physical one, recognizing that the terror they produced served strategic objectives. This candid admission entered official doctrine, shaping debates about weapons ethics that continue today. The physical evidence of what these weapons accomplished remains visible. Visit Iwo Jima today, and you can still find scorched cave entrances, bunker walls blackened by napalm fires that burned 79 years ago. The volcanic rock preserves these scars like a permanent record of what happened when stone fortresses met liquid fire. Okinawa's landscape bears similar marks. Cave mouths sealed by demolition after flame attacks, ridgelines where the vegetation still grows differently, where napalm burned away all organic matter. These sites have become memorials to both the ingenuity and horror of industrial warfare. The technological lineage of the Sherman flame tanks extended into later conflicts. Korea saw limited use of mechanized flamethrowers against cave positions. Vietnam employed both tank-mounted and armored personnel carrier-mounted flame weapons, though with mixed effectiveness in jungle terrain. The weapon's fundamental concept, using armored vehicles to deliver sustained fire into fortified positions, influenced development of thermobaric weapons and modern bunker-busting systems. The Seabees' improvised conversions at Schofield Barracks in 1944 established a template for field modification and rapid adaptation that military engineers still study. The 354 flame tanks produced by Colonel Unmacht's group represented more than just a weapon system. They demonstrated American industrial capacity to identify tactical problems, engineer solutions, and scale production within months rather than years. The Seabee conversions, stripping over 100 moving parts down to half a dozen, simplifying complex systems for field reliability, exemplified the pragmatic innovation that characterized the American war effort. These weren't elegant weapons designed by committees. They were brutal, effective answers built by men who understood that complexity killed in combat, and that the best weapon was the one that worked when you needed it. The Japanese defenders who survived encounters with flame tanks carried their own memories forward. The 216 prisoners captured on Iwo Jima returned to Japan after the war with stories about weapons that turned stone fortresses into crematoriums. Their accounts, combined with reports from Okinawa survivors, entered Japanese military consciousness as cautionary tales about the futility of static defense against overwhelming firepower. Post-war Japanese self-defense force doctrine emphasized mobility and dispersal over fortification, partly informed by lessons learned when caves became death traps. In the end, the story of American flame tanks in the Pacific is a story about problem-solving through overwhelming force. Japanese defensive doctrine had created a tactical problem that conventional weapons couldn't solve efficiently. The Seabees and Chemical Warfare Service engineered a solution that turned enemy strengths, fortification, depth, interconnection, into fatal vulnerabilities. The weapon succeeded not through elegance, but through raw, terrible effectiveness. It saved American lives by taking Japanese lives in ways that still trouble the conscience. It demonstrated that modern warfare's logic often produces weapons whose moral cost matches their tactical value. The ashes of Iwo Jima and Okinawa settled long ago. But the questions raised by what happened there, about the limits of acceptable weapons, about the price of victory, about the relationship between military necessity and human decency, remain as relevant today as they were in 1945. The flame tanks won their battles and helped win the war. Whether they won something worth having is a question each generation must answer for itself.